Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Let me begin by extending a very warm welcome to all of you. Today's program, as you already know, is a talk by Professor Dr. Sami Al-Aryan. Dr. Sami Al-Aryan is the director of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs and Public Affairs professor at Istanbul Sabahattin Zaim University. Dr. Al-Aryan founded numerous institutions and publications in the field of education, research, religion, and interfaith, as well as civil and human rights. Dr. Al-Aryan has written several studies and numerous articles focusing on U.S. foreign policy, Palestine, and the Arab Spring phenomena. He is also the author of the Arab Awakening Unveiled, Understanding Transformations and Revolutions in the Middle East. We are lucky to have him today here. As you know, recently we have witnessed a 15-month-long attempts by Zionism to eliminate Palestinians, to wipe out Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, and all their efforts for genocide have been condemned all over the world. Unfortunately, despite all their brutalities, they are still continuing with attacks on Gaza and West Bank. Although there has been an agreement recently, and the agreement is being seen as a victory for Palestinians, not only by the Arabs, but all over the world. Most of you know about the terms and conditions of the agreement, and it's very obvious that the agreement is in favor of Hamas and not in favor of Israel. Anyhow, we will listen in detail to our learned speaker today, and I'll request Dr. Sami Al-Aryan for his keynote address.
Privilege to be with you this afternoon. We meet today at a very important point, not only in the history of the Palestinian cause, but also I think in the history of the Palestinian Ummah itself. Talking about Palestine in the midst of a genocide brings different feelings, because we need to understand where we are at this moment of history. Palestine is an issue that has been consuming Muslim Ummah now for over a century. And the way I look at this particular issue in the context of the Muslim Ummah is that we started our civilization as an Islamic civilization, starting from the state of Medina with the immigration of the Prophet from Mecca to Medina. This was a very important event in the history of the development of Islamic society and Islamic Ummah. We started a city-state, but then very quickly we're starting to have an Islamic civilization blossoming, expanding. And it was for over 13 centuries, but it was always going forward. Yes, we had some setbacks here and there, but generally speaking, the trend was going upward until that phase of our civilization ended. And it ended with the hegemony of another ideology, another power, Western European powers, basically colonizing the Muslim world, fragmenting the Muslim world, dividing them up, and imposing on them a state of fragmentation, disintegration, weakness, dependency, cultural hegemony. And when the Ottoman Caliphate, which is the last Muslim rule, certainly we had many Muslim rules around, but this was the most prominent at the time. We came under the domination, and with that, there was the rise of Zionism. Zionism came towards the end of the 19th century as the attempt by some Jewish communities, because of the racism and the persecution taking place in Europe against Jews. Their response was, we can build our own nation state system, and we can also be in partnership with Western colonial powers, where we can not only gain a foot in the midst of the Islamic world, but we could also be serving the Western powers. They can serve us, we can serve them as well. And when Britain adopted this project, almost 2 decades after it has started in 1897, by 1917, they had the Balfour Declaration. That concept was in mind that they can solve 2 problems at once. The history of Jews in the world can be divided roughly into the Jews of Islam and the Jews of Christendom. The Jews of Islam lived within the Muslim communities. They were recognized, but Islam recognizes Judaism and Christianity. And they blossomed. They consider that as the golden age of Judaism, living within Muslim communities. And when they were actually kicked out of Spain along with the Muslims, they found much refuge in the Muslim countries, all the way to North Africa, Istanbul, you know. But the Jews of Christendom always had a history of persecution, racism, discrimination. And this is not the time to talk about all these issues, but 2 events like the pogroms in late 19th century, from Russia, Ukraine, other places, as well as the Holocaust taking place in the center of Europe against them. These were some examples of the type of treatment they were having. So Britain wanted to solve 2 problems. First, the excess of Europe's Jews. They can export them, they can transfer them, but they can also solve the problem, the Eastern or the Oriental question, the Eastern meaning the Muslim world, because every time there is an encroachment, there is an invasion, Western invasion, Muslims will regroup and they will repel it. That happened more than once, particularly during the Crusaders. So if they can plant this European entity, but it is not favored in Europe, and they can put it in the midst of the Muslim world, and they can support it, arm it, give it whatever it needs, and then it can act as the first line of defense to keep the Muslim world fragmented, divided, weak, exhausted. That was the idea, and that idea started with the British mandate after, at the end of 1917, after the Balfour Declaration. Within a few years, there was a British mandate that stayed there in Palestine for 28 years. And then that was when they allowed the Jewish communities, particularly from Eastern Europe, but mostly European, to come to Palestine, establish settlements, get prepared to establish a state. Within less than 30 years, state was established with obviously an ethnic cleansing campaign in which it emptied almost 80% of the Palestinians in the territories that they occupied in 1948. That support continued through different means, mainly European, whether it was the British, the German with the compensation because of what they did to them during 30s and 40s, and after that the French, ultimately with the Americans. It's the same mentality that is going, we're going to support them to make sure not only they survive, but they can also be the hegemon in this region. Meanwhile, the Muslim world was trying to get out of the state of weakness, state of fragmentation. Mostly it was under the domination of European powers. And they went through many phases. Eventually, we ended up with nation states, the same Westphalian model that Europeans devised. But of course, it was devised so that they would not be fighting amongst each other, but they will be able to empower themselves and go and colonize the world. And that's what they did up to a point. We had direct imperial powers taking over the Muslim world, and then bit by bit, most of the world, they achieved their nominal independence, but they were under a state of affairs, under a system that was dominated by the West. And then, of course, in the aftermath of World War II, it was a system dominated by the United States, first within the Cold War framework, and then as a unipolar after the collapse of the Soviet Union until recently when there was a rising China. I just trying to put together for you how the world today that we live in today, how it looks like, and the role of Israel in that world. As the United States was considered to be the unipolar, the only superpower that survived that together war for you, and trying to shape how this world according to its image, according to its philosophy, and the role of Israel in that world. They started several wars. Most of these wars were in vain, whether it was Afghanistan or Iraq. Considered to be in the meantime, China was rising, and with the rise of China, there was a challenge. So the United States was trying to regroup, reorient itself. The United States cares about three areas in the world. Wherever you have a great power, trying to make sure that great power does not dominate in vain, whether it was does not control its region, so that if it does, then it would actually go and challenge the US somewhere else, as well as the Gulf area, the Middle East, because of two reasons. One is to control the oil, the most important commodity in the world that controls the whole world economy, but also to make sure that Israel stays strong, survives, and that it's thriving because it, for all the reasons I mentioned. As there was a rise of China, the United States was trying to regroup and focus its efforts on China, and it wanted to establish a regime, a system after its failures in Afghanistan and Iraq, and with the rise of Iran as a challenge. And Iran, of course, had its own reasons after the Islamic Revolution to make sure it stays independent, and because of its ideological position towards Israel, is to establish what they call the axis of resistance. So the United States, after its failures, wanted to again have a situation in the Middle East, in the Arab world, in the situation in Western Asia, that it can outsource this task so it can focus on China. The idea was to integrate Israel into the military structure. They did that in 2020. The United States, militarily speaking, have 7 commands around the world. The one that rules this area that goes from Egypt until Afghanistan, including Pakistan, it's called Central Command. Usually, most of them are friendly countries to the US. Iran is not, but some other countries may have issues here and there. But basically, Israel was not considered part of that because of the different wars. But in 2020, it was brought in after the so-called Abraham Accords, with the Emirates, the Bahrainis, the Morocco, and it was integrated. And then the next step was to establish a normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel, followed by Pakistan and Indonesia. That was the idea. And this was supposed to have been done had Trump been re-elected. And when he wasn't, Biden basically adopted the same strategy. And in March 2024, there was supposed to have been a normalization deal. Saudi Arabia didn't want to go alone, so they were enticing and bringing Pakistan into this deal. That's very important for those who live in Pakistan to understand where the country is heading and what the the plan is. What happened, of course, is that months before, 6 months, 5 months before that, on October 7th, something else happened. And that did not kill these chances, but certainly delayed them and froze this whole process. So now to understand what happened, because of the limitation of time, I'll try to go very quickly over the strategic importance of what happened on October the 7th. There are rational reasons. Some people think that whoever made the decision, it was irrational or it was not thought through. But in fact, when you go and try to analyze what happened October 7th, Tufan al-Aqsa, you'll find that there are rational reasons for them. First of all, Gaza had been under a 16-year siege, continuous siege. Every single item going in or out has to be approved by Israel. It was a situation unparalleled back in any parts of the world, and the whole world was just shrugging. No one really was paying much attention. That siege didn't happen just from the Israeli side, but also from the Egyptian side. The Egyptian side was part and parcel. The Egyptian government was part and parcel. For a brief period during Morsi, it wasn't as bad, but most of the time, it was really very tight. That siege, they tried to get out of. When Sinwar took over and became the leader of Gaza in 2017, he tried many things. He tried to invite the Palestinian Authority, which is an authority in collaboration with Israel, and is being trained, its security forces trained by the Americans and the Jordanians, basically part of the political scene dominated by the occupation forces. He tried to hand over Gaza for the Palestinian Authority. They refused unless Hamas disarms and the other resistance groups disarm, which they're not allowed to do that. He tried what is called the Great March of Return, trying to pressure. He tried many things. He failed. He couldn't get that siege lifted, and it was very, very difficult situation in Gaza. Every single person was impacted, was affected. And on the West Bank side, the Israeli government, the current Israeli government, took over at the end of 2022. So by the beginning of 2023, the Palestinians were facing a real challenge and a threat in which Smotrich, one of the fascist right-wing ministers within the coalition of Netanyahu, was given the portfolio, not only a finance minister, but also he was in charge of the settlement policy inside the West Bank. He says that right now we're about 750,000. By the time this government goes to the next election, about 4 years, will be about 1 million. And then we're going to start our second million. And he gave the Palestinians basically 3 options. The Palestinians will never be part of this state, the greater state of Israel. Palestinians have the first choice is to submit to the Israelis. To understand they will never be citizens. They will have no civil or political rights. They would allow basically to stay to serve the state. And they need to express that and to know that and to be subjects. And he said, I understand that most Palestinians will not agree to that. So the next choice is to get some compensation and leave. And if they don't accept these 2 options, the only third option available is death. In other words, Palestinians are not given any kind of a future stake into what was happening. That's what they were facing. And in conjunction with that, They, the other fascist Nazi-like person in that government, Marvin Kfir, he was in charge of not only the settlers by arming them, they were giving uh, hundreds of thousands of arms to the settlers. At least 150,000 were being armed and being harassing and intimidating and provoking the Palestinians in the West Bank. But also he was in charge of the prison system, and he started taking all the gains, the wins that the struggle of the prisoners gained throughout decades, visitation rights, education, praying together, books, and so on and so forth. You start taking them one by one. So they had another, the Palestinians in Gaza or Hamas or the other factions, not only the siege of Gaza, not only the attempt to annex and take over the areas in the West Bank, but also you had the prisoner situation in which they were basically screaming every day that their situation is getting worse by the day. For Tufan al-Aqsa, there were about 5,700 Palestinians, about 600 sentenced to life in prison, hundreds more, perhaps a couple of thousand more with long sentences, 1,800 never even charged, but they were being dealt with terribly. And then add to that what was happening in Jerusalem itself, which also was under the portfolio of Ben Gvir. There were incursions almost first monthly, then weekly, and then daily. They're trying to impose what they call um, time and space imposition, so that the Jews will have the rights to inside the Al-Aqsa compound, hoping that at one point it would be destroyed and a third temple would be rebuilt. That's why it was called Tufan al-Aqsa. This was, and still is, a genuine threat. The situation in the West Bank is such that under Oslo, which was a 1993 agreement between the Palestinian Authority and Israel, is that there are three areas within that. The first area A is about 18% administered and under the control of the Palestinian Authority. These are the most of the population centers, almost 80 to 85% of Palestinians live in these very restrictive areas with hundreds and hundreds of checkpoints outside these cities. It's like Bantustans of South Africa. Then you have Area B under the administrative control of the Palestinian Authority, but the security control of Israel. It's about 22% of the land. These are mostly villages outside these big centers, maybe 10 to 12% of the population. And then you have 60%. This is designed by the occupation by Israel. And then 60% with very few Palestinians, but vastly amount of space and land. And this is where they would like to annex and take over and build their own settlements. So that's a genuine threat that they're trying to pose on the West Bank. So these are five strategic or five threats that's why I say when you look at what happened to Khan al-Aqsa, there are rationality. We talked about the strategic threat in which there will be no Palestine. The Saudis will normalize, maybe followed by the Pakistanis and the Indonesians. Then who's going to talk about Palestine? No Palestine anymore. It's gone, gone. And you can see what happened 15 days before Tufan al-Aqsa took place on September 22nd, 2023. Netanyahu was in the United Nations General Assembly. He carried a map and started drawing the line that started from India, and it's called the Indian Middle East European Economic Corridor. He drew a line starting from India across the Indian Ocean, the Gulf of Oman, the Persian Gulf, into the United Arab Emirates, from there to Saudi Arabia, to Jordan, and then to Haifa, from Haifa across the Mediterranean to Europe. And basically, he was touting this as being the project in which Israel becomes the hegemon in the region. Nothing is going to happen unless Israel is in control and Israel says so, with all the things that he was hyping. So this is the situation that we were living under in the fall 2023. So when Tufan al-Aqsa came, it really was hitting at the heart of this project. This project was supposed to replace what is called the the the, um, uh, the Road and Build Initiative by China, in which Pakistan is a member of, in order to replace it with this, so that this area would be denied, all other powers would be denied, and of course they know that there are some other powers which are probably difficult to deal with, but they can isolate them and deal with them, Iran and their resistance to access and so on and so forth. So when Tufan al-Aqsa came, it came to hit at least and to address these issues, Gaza, West Bank, Jerusalem, the prisoners, and the strategic situation of integrating the Zionist state within the structure, the military and political and economic structure of the Middle East. Now, what happened is that the success of the Tufan al-Aqsa was beyond even the planners, those who planned it. They never thought that this whole enterprise called Zionist entity is going to collapse that quickly, and with what happened. And you could see that this is a paper tiger at the time, that it was hyped as being this is the army that is invincible army that does not get defeated. This is where they can actually protect everybody, every regime. So they go into these regimes, which are allied by the United States, telling them, yeah, we might regroup or we might relocate or reorient ourselves, but you will be under good protection. Israel is going to protect you. Israel is going to be your partner, and we are behind them. That's why the response that came is not typical. This is not normal response. We have a history of conflicts between different groups, resistance groups, Arab states, others, with the Zionist state. We never had that kind of response openly as such, maybe in 1948, but this was not documented as such. But here you had a ferocious, brutal response, which is nothing less than a genocide and ethnic cleansing. So this all came together because that concept of an invincible army was shattered. That this whole reputation, this whole status that they were touting themselves as, that we can actually protect, we are the hegemon, we are in control, everybody needs to submit. This, with just a group, few hundred men, no more than maybe 1,200, 1,500 people, they brought it to this crushing defeat at the time. So this came with the idea. And then we see that throughout the campaign for 15 months, despite all the suffering, the plan was to destroy Gaza, not only out of revenge, but also try to restore this image of an invincible army, this image of being the strongest, and that we can deter, because their deterrence, which was based on the fact that people think that cannot be defeated, so why even try? This was also broken, this was shattered. So they're trying to restore this image. Similarly, the United States is a full partner into this genocide. It's complicitous. It gave it not only $22 billion worth of arms, and before Biden even left office, he gave another $8 billion, which is unprecedented also in the history of that relationship. $30 billion, every single bomb, missile, bullet, ammunition, they came from the United States. So they're fully part of this genocide. And they did it because they were genuinely feeling that this whole Zionist project, this whole Zionist entity is in jeopardy. And they just didn't care about this whole international system that they had built, which talks about democracy, human rights, rule of law, you name it. This whole thing was shattered. It just showed that these are just slogans that have really no meaning on the ground. This is not just double standards. This is much more than that. They just didn't care, because preserving the Zionist enterprise, the Zionist entity, the Zionist penetration into the Muslim world uh, is more important than any of these things, which will have long-term repercussions. Now, very quickly, let me just go over so we can get some time for questions and answers. The strategic losses of what happened, again, in our assessment, what actually happened. And then I will conclude talking about current situation. When you look at 15 months of genocide, 15 months of destruction, tens of thousands of people killed and missing, hundreds of thousands injured, millions displaced, the destruction of every facet of civilian life within Gaza. Nothing was spared: clinics, hospitals, universities, schools, bakeries, water salination plants, electric generation stations, and so on and so forth. Everything was destroyed. Then you're not really facing a rational situation here. You're facing what they call existential threat. And they didn't care about anything. And therefore, the response that came out of this was to the level in which we can really assess the future. The future of Zionism in the region and of the Zionist enterprise in the region should be looked at as either they are in control, they are the hegemon, they are the ones who would dictate what happens in this part of the world, particularly in the heart of the Muslim world and beyond. And they cannot be integrated. If there is anything people need to realize, is that there is no middle ground with Zionism. Zionism seeks to dominate. Zionism seeks to be in control. Zionism wants to rule over here, and it will not allow for any country or state or government or group to do anything that might be perceived as a threat to it. If Hamas, small group, can do this, if some of the resistance groups can actually withstand 15 months of ferocious assaults, then what's going to happen if the others? So any attempt for unification, for renaissance, for scientific advancement, for economic prosperity, for building any kind of military power, it would be faced by the Zionist regime and its supporters to make sure it does not go further enough. That's why, for example, when you hear about in the 1990s, I remember before Pakistan announced that it has a nuclear weapon, the whole thing was that Pakistan should never be allowed a nuclear weapon. When it did, back in 97, 98, and it became apparent that Pakistan has it, then he said, okay, that's only for India. It's nothing to do with Palestine, has nothing to do with Israel. All right, so they worked very hard since then to make sure that the Pakistanis, the mentality or the collective understanding of people in Pakistan, that this has nothing to do with Israel. Not that Pakistan is the only Muslim country that has a nuclear weapon, and it can unilaterally announce that Israel cannot monopolize the use of nuclear weapons against any Muslim country or entity. And if that happens, then Pakistan, as if Pakistan is that. No. What the Pakistanis need to understand that this is only could be used or only could be targeting India and has nothing to do with anything else. So that's part of the education that we need to, or a discussion we need to talk about. Anyway, getting back to the strategic losses. So Israel, when you look at all aspects, has lost it. Strategically speaking, no one now can argue that Israel has the power to protect anybody, to not even protect itself. It failed miserably on many fronts. Intelligence-wise, it could not predict, could not prevent what happened on October the 7th. And we're talking about, again, small group next door that supposedly have been under Israeli surveillance and infiltration, and yet it could not prevent it. When you look at the military doctrine, Israel, you will find that each and every one of them was undermined. Israeli military doctrine depends on 6 imperatives. First is preemptive strikes. Israel doesn't want to be hit or attacked on its own soil. So always try to preempt. This is the first time in the history of the conflict where its military bases were hit first. Even in 1973, yes, it was hit first, but it was on Egyptian soil and Syrian soil. This time around, it was inside its own, or what it considers its own, whether it was military bases or settlements. So that's the first one. The second one is early warning. This time, it failed miserably also. We could not predict it, we could not prevent it. So that system also failed. The third imperative is effective deterrence. For 15 months, no one was deterred. Until the last moment, the resistance was fighting back, targeting their soldiers, targeting their cities. Even when Hezbollah, despite what they inflicted on Hezbollah, tactical things with assassinations and pagers and so on and so forth, Hezbollah, before they had a ceasefire with them, they were hitting Tel Aviv, they were hitting industrial areas. When look at the fourth imperative, for example, look at the Houthis as example. Houthis are not deterred. They go and hit them left and right, and they return, and they hit back. So no one's deterred. Look at the fourth imperative, which is strong defense. No one can claim today, despite all the American technology and European technology, they basically opened everything for them in terms of technology, in terms of weaponry. Yet, what is a strong defense? When Iran sent few drones, few hundred drones, which is not the state of the art, but they were coordinated. Israel needed the help, the military involvement and help of the United States, Britain, France, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and possibly other states, just so that they can defend themselves and not an overall attack, only one or two attacks. So even that strong defense is not there. The fifth principle is quick resolution. Israel doesn't want prolonged wars. In 1967, it took them few hours to dominate, and then 6 days just to reach the Suez Canal. But the war ended basically within 3-4 hours. This time around 15 months, and they could not resolve it. You know, this is unprecedented also in the history of the conflict. That's a huge deterioration. Despite everything they said we're going to do, we're going to destroy Hamas, crush Hamas, eradicate Hamas, eliminate Hamas, dismantle Hamas. I mean, they kept saying these things, and yet 15 months later, they were not able to achieve them. We could not dislodge Hamas, and we could not destroy the resistance in Palestine. In fact, perhaps, yes, they were able to have tactical wins in their assassination and destruction, but that's not how you win. You win through achieving and fulfilling your political goals. Their political goals was number one, to destroy and eradicate and eliminate the resistance in Gaza. That was not achieved. At the end, they had to negotiate with Hamas. Number two, they wanted to dislodge Hamas from the rule of Gaza. They were not able to do that. Third, they said we're going to free all our hostages / captives without having to pay any price. In fact, we're going to go get them out of military pressure. We couldn't free them through military pressure. They had at the end to release, if the agreement is fulfilled in total, thousands of Palestinian prisoners, including possibly everyone who is sentenced to life sentence, because in the first phase, they would have to get half of them, almost 300 released. So none of these political objectives were achieved, meaning if you fail, because if you go to any military strategist, from Sun Tzu to Clausewitz and so on and so forth, they would tell you that it's not about military wins. It's about achieving your political goals. And if you're unable to achieve your political goals, then you've lost. And usually when you have asymmetric warfare between a strong party and a weak party, the weak party wins by not losing. And the strong party loses by not winning. Since they did not win, then they have lost. This will have an unbelievable and incredible impact on the future of the region. Let me just very quickly also say on all the other aspects, they lost. Today, it's a criminal state. It's the National Court of Justice would rule that this is a genocide. Everybody agrees. Any expert today would say what happened is genocide. It's a war crime. So whatever they were marketing themselves as, that's gone. Their leaders, the Prime Minister, former Defense Minister, they are being pursued in the International Criminal Court as war criminals. They could be arrested if there are over 150 countries if we go to. They should be arrested and handed over. When you look at the narrative, the Zionist narrative today, it's crumbling. No one talks about the Zionist narrative. I don't have time to go over all the different 8 narratives that they have, but no one today actually seriously would give you a Zionist narrative. That's destroyed. Even politically, in the past, the ceiling would be two-state solution, but no one was really talking about it. Today they start by talking about two-state solution. We will just tell you from the outset, there is no two-state solution. That's gone. That train is gone. And so any politician that comes to you, any person that comes to you and tell you that there is a viable two-state solution, don't believe them. These are lies. These are not consistent with facts. This is gone. And after we saw what we saw in Gaza, we cannot vouch for any kind of a settlement or any kind of coexistence with a Zionist ideology. Zionist ideology is an ideology that is settler, colonial, aggressive, that wants to uproot the people of Palestine, that wants to exclude any people, any that are not Jews from Palestine, so that it can be the hegemon in the area. You cannot coexist. It's a racist, supremacist ideology. We cannot coexist with such a place. And therefore, our goal should be to dismantle the Zionist regime. We're not talking about here killing Jews, because as I said earlier, the Jews of Islam, we have no problem because we recognize them. We do not fight Jews because of their faith. We fight the aggressors, the Zionists. And since we brought this in, let me define who a Zionist is. A Zionist is any person who believes or acknowledges or recognizes that Jews have a sovereign right in Palestine, exclusive right in Palestine. If you believe in that, then you are a Zionist. That's how they define it. I'm just repeating what they define. So if you believe in a two-state solution, then you are 78% Zionist, because you believe that they have 78% right to settle in Palestine. And as I said, they cannot survive without sure that no one is that they will stay in this. Therefore, what we need to learn. Now, I could have gone on and on, the political side, the media side, but forward for the future, we have to understand, first of all, that the resistance was not defeated, because you defeat the resistance is not surrender, or when you impose your will, they couldn't impose their will. That's where they keep, because it's a goal that they are unable actually to impose on the Palestinians. But the problem has always been not that the Palestinians were not resisting. The problem has always been that the rest of the Ummah is just asleep. The rest of the Ummah is not doing its part. So this is a time for us to look at what we need to do to be part of the struggle. The struggle is very simple. If our goal is to dismantle the Zionist regime and the Zionist enterprise, you have to understand the formula. Formula is this: it cannot be done without the Palestinians, and it can't be done with the Palestinians at all. Every single person must take part in this. This is not a Palestinian problem. It's an Israeli problem that's going to impact and affect every single person, not only in the Muslim world, but across the world. And therefore, we need to all come together. It's the same thing in the 1980s, people talking about the apartheid regime in South Africa. Yes, it's impacting South Africa, South Africans directly. But that regime, had it stopped, it's going to be a blot on every single living person that they allow such a racist regime to exist where they look. And but Zionism is even worse than what's happening in South Africa. Again, dismantling a Zionist structure is not tantamount, it's not the same as saying you're targeting Jews. As I said, we have no problem with Jews. Actually, our civilizational solution to the problem of Zionism is this. Zionism started because Europe could not integrate its Jews. It was persecuting its Jews. So it opted to export its excess, its Jews, to this part of the world, and to make sure that if they will stay here, to make sure that this part of the world will stay in the state of weakness that it is. And we say this is unacceptable. You cannot do that at the expense of the Palestinians or the expense of others. And therefore, our solution is that we're not going to allow a regime that will impose its racist supremacist ideology on us. And if Europe cannot take it, then they can be immigrants in any part of the Muslim world, from Morocco to Indonesia, but not at the expense of Palestinian rights. Just the immigrants, not as sovereign state. If they don't want to live here, they can go back to their countries. That's the bottom line. Now, to do this, in light of what happened in Tufan al-Aqsa, October 7th, is to realize, every single person needs to realize that this is where we are, that this is the situation, that this is no state solution, and that we are all in danger. They will not allow any Muslim society to progress. Yes, we have many problems within the Muslim society. But let me end with this. The biggest problem is not that we don't have national projects or even Ummah type projects. The problem here is we need to focus on the right problem by making the right diagnosis. And in my view, the right diagnosis is this. We cannot be allowed, they will not allow us to engage in any kind of a project that will change the situation before we are truly independent. We're not independent. Despite that we can do things here or there, at the end of the day, those elites, those rulers within the Muslim countries, they have either willingly or unwillingly made themselves in a situation where they are not truly independent. And unless we are independent, we cannot engage in any kind of an ummah type project where we can actually progress or restore the same, what I call the second universality of Islam, the same project that the early Muslims brought about. That means to be independent, we have to eradicate foreign influence in all fields. And the height of the foreign influence in this part of the world is the presence and existence of the state of Israel. Therefore, dismantling that Zionist regime could be the biggest and most important response to eradicating foreign influence in our region, in our ummah. And to do that, that means every single person needs to start being engaged. We need to identify the sources of power to this. I have a study, I identified them in 12 different pillars. Then you could see how you can weaken them. That means every single person would be involved in this project. Again, when you look at Tufan al-Aqsa, give us a lot of ideas and codes, and it basically gives us the map of how this could be done. This is not a final battle. This was a very important battle to understand where we are and where we're heading. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sami, for a very comprehensive talk and a really convincing argument. We are grateful to you. Now we have a brief time for question and answers. As we are already running short of time, kindly be brief while asking the question. Kindly introduce yourself and then ask a brief question. Brigadier Syed Nazir. What if there is no common difference? Why? What? Now, all the there is no rule of first and there and the Muslim. But the Muslim world is there. So it is true, it existed. And that existence was not visible in this album of the one. So Islamic interpretation, and at the same time, we consider it as it is. Let's go. Judicial are because the exposure to the extent they are not sensitive to the present. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you so much. These are very good questions. In terms of yes, the objectives or aims of the war, they had several announced and unannounced, declared and undeclared. The three declared have all failed, as I said, whether to eradicate or eliminate the resistance completely. That has not changed. Actually, there are much evidence that the number of resistance fighters in Palestine, those that they have killed, they have been replaced already. So you can't, and then even they acknowledge you can't kill an idea, the idea of resistance. Resistance in Palestine has stayed for over a century. It's not about to change, extinguish. In terms of dislodging the rule of Hamas, which sometimes referred to as the day after, that has always failed. There is no plan right now how what to do, even though there are regimes regional in the region, if they're trying to impose some sort of an order. Once that the ceasefire started, everybody was out from Hamas, from the police to the civil servants and so on and so forth. That also failed. They themselves acknowledged that. For the return of hostages or captives, that's also very clear. So any of these declared objectives or aims have failed. Now, there has also been other plans that also failed along. Very early on, they wanted to empty and exile the Palestinians by having alternative lands, whether in Sinai or different places. They had this pier to be built so that they can transfer hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to Cyprus and from there to Canada. All that failed. None of that came about. So all the plans, they tried to also poison the resistance in the tunnels. All that failed. So none of that has failed. Now, yes, they do have nuclear weapons and unconventional warfare, and they use some of it, not in a way that they could be, because all these would have been also not just outrageous, but they would have also have larger implications on their use worldwide. So it would have been, I mean, actually, some ministers called for the use of nuclear weapons on Palestinians, but that would have been maybe one bridge too far for them to cross. These weapons are supposed to deter. There are even talks about using tactical ones, but that also is not an easy decision. So all in all, by them also failing to do it, that tells you that they are unable also to utilize that. That's also not very, very difficult. Now, in terms of third question, Western world versus Islamic world, that's our weakest link, particularly in the Arab world. No Turkey tried, but we also should look at the experiment or the what we call the axis of resistance. That it should not only be Shia. I mean, when you talk about axis of resistance, we have basically right now two parts. we have the Palestinians who are not Shia, and they are trying to do their best to resist. And they are the first victims. And you have the rest of them who are either Iran or Hezbollah or the Islamic resistance in Iraq or the Ansarullah in Yemen. They come from that tradition. And that tradition is basically supported by state, which is Iran. Iran has made a decision decades ago that it wants to make a difference in this struggle, considers Israel as its strategic enemy, and therefore it's trying to build this force. We don't have a counter one on somewhere. That's our weakness. We should not blame them for doing this, and we should not try to reinterpret it in a way so that it absolves us from our responsibility. We needed, and we still need, other Sunni states to look at Israel as a strategic threat, not simply as a state that may or may not be a threat to it. It is actually a strategic threat. I was in the United States at the time when every Zionist organization was fighting the nuclear program in Pakistan and put it under sanctions and so on and so forth. For a simple reason, not just because others have it. I mean, we don't call it the Hindu bomb and the Christian bomb and the Jewish bomb and the Confucius bomb, but they were calling it the Islamic bomb because they see the potential. But Pakistan is whatever Pakistan is doing, this could actually benefit the whole Muslim world. And who could be the biggest loser in this would have been Israel. So they were trying to fight it. Actually, they even were contemplating, we know now, even to destroy that program, but thank God, alhamdulillah, it didn't happen. So the idea here is that we need to, and this is my final point, the Islamic movements, the popular movements, the nationalist movements, they need to reorganize and think of different kinds of resistance. If they cannot do military resistance, at least they can do all kinds of resistance. And this is part of what I've been telling, that they need to look at this conflict in a comprehensive way. You can do all kinds of forms of resistance, and you can actually impact and try to weaken the influence of Zionism worldwide. Here in Pakistan, you have Zionist interests. What are you going to do about it? You need to identify them. You need to start organizing, mobilizing, and you need to start putting together popular movements in order to fight them, because they will always try to weaken Pakistan, divide Pakistan, and make it a state that will not be supportive of any struggle against Zionism. आपके पास था तो पहले ही दस
Thank you, Professor, for your insightful overview. I am Ali Hamza, and I'm a researcher at Islamabad Policy Research Institute, focused on the Middle East. You were very right to point out that the Operation Tufan al-Aqsa did not happen in isolation or in a vacuum. There's a background for it. The 16 years siege of Gaza and how they have been brutalized for years. I'd like to ask you about the role of Palestinian Authority it has been playing, because it has been very visible that it was the accomplice of the Israeli regime and just phasing out the Gazans. In 2007, I was just looking at a report by Al Jazeera where, at the request of the Palestinian Authority, electricity was cut off from Gaza. And even today, I'd like you to please throw some light on its role today when the people in the Jenin camp are being brutalized and it is administered technically by the Palestinian Authority. So on what side it stands and how much of a hurdle it is towards the freedom of Palestinians and their struggle?
Yes, let's club 2, 3 questions after your questions are.
I'm Nishan Hazm from the District Secretary of the Palestine. With Iran's continued support for Palestinian resistance and the upcoming Operation Israel-Iran war, and what would be its implication on the ongoing Gaza situation?
What was the last part? Yeah, and after that, we said something.
after the Iran is going to operate another operation on the Israeli territory, Operation True Promise 3. Yeah. So what will be the implications for the ongoing Gaza situation after the operation?
Gee,
You rightly analyzed and concluded that Israel could not achieve its political objective, and that the Palestinians showed distinctly more distance this time compared to the past. What about the public support this time compared in the past? The public support or the role of the government in Islamic world, for example, may not be different from what happened in the past. But what about the public support that this time in the West, not asking only the Muslim living in the West, but the non-Muslim, the way they came out of the road, I mean, don't you think it was a distinctly more than in the past? It will have impact. I mean, in the long run.
again, thank you. These are very good. These are very good questions. First on the Palestinian Authority. If you recall, the Palestinian Authority came as a result of the 1993-94 Oslo Accord. 93 is when they signed 94 and was implemented, which there would be the Palestinian leadership, particularly the Fatah group, in exchange for them recognizing Israel, 78% of Palestine, that they would get back state. And of course, the Israelis never contemplated that. There was never any explicit promise, neither in the Oslo Accords nor afterwards, that there would be Palestinian state. People were discussing that. The Palestinian Authority was selling this, knowing fully well that the Zionist ideology, the Zionist regime, the Zionist enterprise is not going to allow this. In fact, the whole Accords was organized so that it would be a collaborator. And that's why the head of the Palestinian Authority, Abu Mazen himself, said that this is an five-star operation, meaning that we are just serving the occupation, we're not doing anything. And we have a track record now, over 30 years, in which there has been zero results in terms of the actual accomplishment. It's even worse after the second intifada that came as a result of the failure, because they were supposed to reach a permanent status by 1999, the failure of which in 2000 made the first intifada uprising taking place. In the aftermath, Arafat was eliminated from the scene. Another person was brought in with a choice of Israel and the United States and some other regional countries in order to pacify whatever Palestinians. So they started training Palestinian security forces, and the U.S. actually pays for the budget, pays for the salaries, for the simple task of preventing any kind of resistance coming from the West. And that happened throughout the years, starting from 2005. Now it's even worse because the Israelis themselves, particularly the right wingers, Netanyahu and his ilk, they don't even want to deal with it. They want to establish greater Israel and find a final solution for the Palestinians. And the Palestinian Authority can be supported to the extent that it can prevent the Palestinians from resisting. And now what the Palestinian Authority is trying to do is to say that they are capable of controlling the Palestinians so that they could have a seat at the table. It's all defeatist mentality. So in short, the Palestinian Authority has no authority. Palestinian forces, security forces, been trained by the Americans and the Jordanians for the simple reason of controlling any kind of Palestinian resistance. When they failed to do so in Jenin and Turkey and Naples and other places, they have been used in order to crush whatever is left, and they failed to do so. So that's when the Israelis bombed them yesterday and so on and so forth. So I don't think anybody can argue seriously that the Palestinian Authority would be an answer to the Palestinian question. The problem here is Fatah has been part and parcel. It's one of the largest organizations within the Palestinian factions. And they were able to split Fatah to many factions using all kinds of tools, including giving privileges to some of its leaders, to compromise economic rights, but also largely you have many people who are affiliated with the Palestinian Authority, the bureaucracy of administering Palestinian affairs. They are using the tactic of giving them loans, have all kinds of payments, this kind of economic chains that have been used. Now, what will be the future of this? I think the next battle is in the West Bank. And I believe that there will be many changes, particularly after the leader, 87, departs the scene. I don't think they will be able to conduct any kind of elections, support elections or else. He was elected once in 2005. So he's now in his 20th year for 5 years. So as now on the issue of Iran and Israel, what are the implications? Well, I believe that Israel is trying very hard with the United States for a regime change. I believe that the president of Iran and his foreign minister were killed by Israel from Azerbaijan last May. I think they're trying to very hard change that regime. I think they will fail, but there will be lots of tension. They will try to manipulate the U.S. administration and public opinion, trying to destroy the nuclear program in Iran. That we have, I don't think they will succeed. It's not zero, but they have, perhaps they will try. With Trump, nothing is certain, even though I don't think he will go for it, because the implications there are very horrendous. If they attack Iran significant way, the whole world economy will come crashing down. Iran is capable of basically hitting all the oil fields and refineries in the region, which will destroy the world economy. I don't think Trump or anyone else would be willing to do that. Because again, there for 3-4 years to do that, his presidency is over, and we're not going to outsource this. The relationship between the U.S. and Israel comes down to this. Israel will have free hand to do what it wants with non-state allies. Hamas, Hezbollah, but it does not have free hand to the states. These will have larger positions. Therefore, can perhaps allow a tactical strike here and there, but it would not allow a full-scale war because the implications there. On the other hand, when Iran standpoint, I think Iran also has some decisions to make. It has been weakened with what happened. Regardless of look at it, it's not defeated by sense, but it has been weakened. There is a deadline coming soon, the 27th this week, about withdrawing from southern Lebanon. What's going to happen there? Israel does not withdraw. But what does that mean? Hezbollah cannot remain on the sidelines. Hezbollah has not been defeated. Yes, its leaders been assassinated, has lost this at least symbolic important charismatic leader. But at the end of the day, it has not been weakened. What happened in Syria also weakened the Axis, but it's not certain also that this revolution is going to be, or this success is going to be particularly even though now it appears otherwise, in a situation where Israel can benefit permanently. So all these things put together, that is state of uncertainty. And with the following, that the Assad resistance still there, it is still hurting Israeli interests. That brings me to the third question about where the Islamic world. See, this is where we have the weakest point. If the Islamic world can actually contribute to this axis, we can revive or establish another axis that could be around states or around non-state actors or around NGOs or whatever. Because we didn't do our, why would Ansarullah act with the rest of the Islamic movement just act like not accepting what prevents them? Seeing that they were capable at one point or another of breaking havoc on Western interests, which are part and parcel. You mentioned the West and how it was supported, but also we saw within the West these cracks. These are very important. That's part of the security process. What happened in the university? Hundreds of thousands of students, hundreds of universities. Now, for the first time, understanding the depth of what it means to support Israel. This is going to have a long impact for the future. This is very important because this conflict is not going to be resolved within a year or two. It takes generations. And now we have a new generation that has seen firsthand, not for a week or two or a month or two, but continuous months, a genocide taking place before its own eyes with the help, with the active participation of the West. That's going to have an impact. And that's, I think, very important to resolve. Both we have seen in the media and other places, people are no longer questioning whether dismantling of the Zionist state is something that out of the ordinary. A lot of people are saying this now. In the past, there wasn't. But also, we could see that the Muslim world needs to start asking these hard questions. Now, in the West, the US has two strategies. One strategy for rich countries and one strategy for poor. For the rich countries, says you're weak, you're very rich, you're weak, so don't protect you. Provided that you put your money into us. Provided we have these conditions, you're going to deposit your money in our banks, in our society. We're going to invest there to tell you what you can also do and how much you can profit from this. In exchange for that, you have to sell your oil in dollars, make sure that we are controlling that these assets. For poor countries, they use the opposite. You're going to give them money for this, right? So what do you want? Then they start, we can destroy your economy because you cannot pay back. So one country, for example, could pay hundreds of billions of dollars of debt, not necessarily by the government, but by private corporations. But the government has to guarantee this money. So it's comes back time to pay. They say, okay, now you cannot pay us. You can reschedule these payments. If you take the policy decision against them, for example, you say, I'm going to stand up to Israel, so you pay now. So either way, so that takes me back to my original assertion. You are not independent. To be independent, eradicate foreign influence, that means 1 or 2 generations would have to sacrifice. Are our people ready to sacrifice? Most of the elites, they're not willing to sacrifice. Even if they're honest, they don't steal people's money, people's resources, they're not willing to sacrifice. These are very important questions that those who are in the public sphere, those who are leading movements, who are changing their society, they have to start acting. This is not about economic prosperity. So we here today, we all want to come to power because we would like to do economic prosperity. You want to do economic prosperity? You have to deal with capitalist structures. They're going to bring you and you're not going to be independent. They're going to control you forever. You have to be honest with them. But we also have to be honest, not that you benefit and they don't benefit. We have to say we are not independent. Our fight right now is for truly independent and building our economies in the right way, which means we may have to suffer until we build it on the right track. So if you are, but again, these things have cost. And you have to be honest with yourself, with the people, are we willing to pay this cost? It's an uphill battle, but I believe we can put it before. Any other reforms will take us to the same path, failure that we have, and to be dependent on them, on the West, other regimes in which we will stay in the sun.
Thank you. And towards the end, I'll request Chairman IPS, Brother Khalid Rahman, for his concluding remarks.
Let me begin by thanking Dr. Sami for not only coming to IPS, but covering a large journey of Palestine in such a short time. And that, I endorse the point that I certainly provided us a lot of information. In these concluding remarks, I'm not going to talk deeply, but perhaps endorsing some of the points and adding a few points just to contribute on my view. When you look at the topic, paths to peace, unpacking the question of Palestine, I would like to highlight 3 points in this regard that we are addressing. First, path is essentially, or searching for path is essentially a concept for the future. And when we are talking about future, and we don't discuss the past, we are not going to really the attention that deserves it. And when we are trying to unpack the question, we require keeping in view the overall context. And the context means past, present. With these 3 points, I think when we look at the current situation, and we don't have time to go past to the thousands of years, which this subject has in its culture, in its religious, historical damage, civilizational damage. The only difference that perhaps in current days dynamics of the issue is the advancement of war technology and the information. And what I found in this 15 months period, that this had both positive and positive factor. This played a positive factor not only for Israel, but more for the Hamas people. Because this was the first war, as is being said. This was the first war which was being discussed in real time on digital media. And this was available to the whole world. And as rightly said by Dr. Sami, that the Generation Z and Generation Alpha, they were all looking at it in their own gadgets and were participating. Then on the streets, they were also present. So that is the difference, and it is going to create a big impact in the future. It is obvious that there was a huge gap in resources between the two partners. Still, the result is very obvious. And another point that in all these days has been highlighted again is about the role of UN. Now, again, I would say that as far as the UN is concerned, it is responsible for this legitimate country. It has given birth to this. But at the same time, and that's why many of us criticize frequently. But I think it has also 2 dimensions. One is that as far as system is concerned, it is true. But at the same time, when the things are processed with the UN. Because of this public pressure, the amount of support that has given to Palestinians for Hamas during this period from the journalism that has exposed very important fact that as far as the large majority of the country is concerned, they are on the Hamas side. So the Security Council has an inherent problem, and that perhaps will continue for some time. But this has highlighted that UN needs a lot of reform or some kind of other arrangement. Whatever arrangement that was made in 1945, this may not be continued for long. This is another point that I would like to highlight. As far as the issue of who has won and who has lost, I think from this document, it's quite obvious that whatever claims were made by Netanyahu, by the leadership, they could not achieve anything of them. In fact, they just killed people, they flattened the area, but as far as the eradication of Hamas or Gaza is concerned, or pushing them out of Gaza, they have been a problem. And at the same time, the image of Israel being invincible, having so much power, that has also been lost. All over the world, we find that Israel has lost friends, even in the Western world. Still, there is a lot of strength it has because of additional support that it was enjoying. And perhaps it will continue for some time. But the way things have changed, it is certainly going to make an effect. I agree that it's a long journey. We should not expect that this particular battle has given us so much success that it might lead to very great real change in the dynamics of it. Yes, the amount of encouragement that the people in Gaza and all over the world who are they have gained, it has given its strength, but of course, it will take more effort, more sacrifices, and a kind of united effort from every level. I think this question of Israel is now shifting towards the question of Palestine is now shifting towards the question of Israel. And it is a matter of survival for Israel because the way they have now recognizing people parties are Netanyahu is also suffered. And whatever has happened during the last 16 months, it has exposed them that within and outside also, they cannot sustain the representation. The question of Muslim response, I think we need to recognize that we have to one is external, what we are doing, what people are doing, but we have an internal front. That internal front is that within the Muslim society, wake up with them, to communicate with them, encourage them to do something. In that context, this whole episode of 15 months, it has provided us a lot in the context of war of land, which is the real war. Whether it is a success or failure of Israel or Hamas has won, now this is one very important question. The whole Western media would like to emphasize that they are coming up with stories like this. This war on narrative has become easier for us. We have a lot of material for it. But to what extent we can use it, that is the challenge. So all in all, I think it was a good. Limited time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm grateful to all of you for participating in today's event. And let me express my special gratitude to Professor Dr. Sami for visiting IPS, for sharing his views on Palestine issue, and for explaining the complexities and the intricacies of the issue. I'm once again thankful to him and to all of you. But before we leave, I'll ask Chairman IPS, Mr. Khalid Rahman, to present some of our publications as souvenir to the guests.
Dr. Gilan will be the member of our national council.